Okay, we're going to take a look at the Arch of Constantine. And this was put up around 315 by the Senate. And it's basically a triple arch. And it's in the tradition of the Roman triumphal arch. We've seen these quite a bit. Typically something the Romans put up to commemorate something. And in this case, it was commemorating Constantine's defeat of Maxentius. And this was one of the biggest arches erected in Rome since the Severan dynasty. So really, from the Severan dynasty to the Constantine dynasty, there was just a lot of unrest. But with Constantine, they started these building projects again. And it's actually made from other monuments. So parts were actually taken from other monuments made by Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. So most of the columns that you see and the architectural elements, a lot of them are recycled from, and the reliefs are recycled from the 2nd century. And this process of reusing art is called spoilia, which means spoils. And some scholars think this was an act of desperation because of the failing economy during the time and the general decline of Rome. But others believe it was really a deliberate act, not done out of desperation, but what they're trying to do by recycling these elements from Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, and then also combining them with modern images made in the time of Constantine and with images of Constantine. They're trying to align Constantine with the older, more successful good emperors of the 2nd century. And the reliefs done in the time of Constantine do stick out. So some of these were done in the time of Constantine when it was erected. And they stick out as being possibly of lesser quality, definitely not in the classical style. The carving is not as good, and the subject matter tends to be a bit more primitive. Most of the figures are squat and not naturalistic, and there's not a lot of motion being shown in the Constantinian reliefs, and we'll take a look at one of those a little closer. And this relief was done in the 3rd century when Constantine was alive, and you can see this is done in a really rigid and formal style. And that really reflects the new values that would come to dominate medieval art, which was more iconographical in nature than it was classical in nature, which classical was more naturalistic, more movement, more realistic. So they're actually moving away from that and going more with an iconographical look during the Middle Ages and during the late Empire in Rome. And in this relief, you can quickly see the emperor here, and the emperor is handing out what they call largesse to the folks down here, and the fact that they're lower in the composition also shows that they're in a lower class. And the composition is very rigid and formal and reflects a new set of values that kind of replace the classical notion that a picture is a window into the world. And, the compositional principles of the late antique style actually, become those of the early medieval art. So, the fact that they're not going with the classical style doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse or better. It's just different. So we just kind of need to try and remember that. I think a lot of people get a little bit caught up in the classical style and think that it's the best. And, it's not always the case. So we'll keep moving on. The Portrait of Constantine from the Basilica Nova, Rome, 1315 to 1330, marble. And it's really large. It's 8 feet 6 inches high. And that's just the bust of this statue, which I believe is the only surviving part of the statue, or maybe there are other surviving parts, but it's all in fragments. So once Constantine took control of Rome, the portraits of him changed. They began to look more like the Augustan image of a forever youthful leader. And this portrait is 8.5 feet tall, and it's definitely a fragment of a colossal enthroned statue of the emperor that was originally in the Basilica Nova in Rome. And the emperor's image would have been really awe-inspiring when you entered the Basilica Nova. Much like the statues of the divinities in Greek temples might have been awe-inspiring. So I think that's kind of what he was going for with this huge statue inside the Basilica Nova. And So the statue's head and limbs were marble, but it had a brick core and a wood torso covered with bronze. So it was kind of a composite of materials. This particular bust obviously is marble, but the other parts were made of brick, wood, and bronze. And the emperor actually held an orb, and it might have had the cross on it of Christ, which was a symbol of global power. And in his left hand, that's what he would have held, was the globe. And then his eyes are really enormous. If we see that, it almost looks like a cartoon. And his personality is kind of lost in the image of, gigantic authority and power, and definitely the colossal size is comparing him to Jupiter. And it shows just a lot of power in it. And that's why he's made so large, just to make him look very powerful. So we'll take a look at 2 coins with portraits of Constantine. So this one is earlier and this one's later. And the top coin dates to when Constantine was actually in his early 20s, and his position was not very secure. So he appears, considerably older because he adopted the imagery of the tetrarchs who came before him. And then in the bottom coin, we can see after the defeat of Maxentius and the Edict of Milan, which was, when they stopped persecuting Christians, Constantine was now very unchallenged. So he is a little bit going more with what he probably wanted to go with. He's more clean shaven. He looks his real age. And these 2 coins, if you compare them, they illustrate the ability of the Roman emperors to change their image to suit their needs at that particular time. In Roman art, portrait is not synonymous with likeness. They kind of went with whatever image was going to get them ahead as much as possible during the time that they were in. So the second coin can also is interesting because it shows the emperor traditionally as a great military leader. He has a helmet on. He has a shield with, and he has his horse next to him. The shield has the she-wolf suckling Romulus and Remus, who were the founders of Rome, the first kings of Rome. Instead of the traditional eagle-top scepter, though, he holds a cross-crowned orb, which, is a symbol of Christianity. And we can actually see also on his helmet, there's some initials that basically tie back to Christogram, which is the letters of Christ's name in Greek. And so that's on his helmet or on his forehead somewhere here. I can't really tell exactly where, so here Constantine is portrayed as both a Roman emperor and soldier, and a soldier in the army of the Lord as well. So the coin, like a lot of Constantinian art in general, belongs to both the ancient and the medieval worlds. So the ancient world is pagan, and the medieval world is Christian. So we're seeing that kind of blending of Christianity into the Roman Empire. And we're going to actually, in the next chapter, we're going to be going over even more Christian themes. So